President Trump launching a flurry of attacks at a Phoenix rally, lashing out at Republicans, Democrats, and most of all, the media. Welcome to Happening Now. I'm John Scott.
And I'm Melissa Francis. The president in full-on campaign mode last night, accusing the media of misconstruing his response to the deadly violence in Charlottesville, while threatening to shut down the government over funding for his border wall. Take a look.
Believe me, if we have to close down our government, we're building that wall. Does anybody want me to be soft on the vetting, or would you like me? Extreme vetting. I came up with that term. ABC this morning. I don't watch it much, but I'm watching in the morning. And they have little George Stephanopoulos, and he talks about the speech I made last night, which, believe it or not, got great reviews, right? They had a hard time. The only people giving a platform to these hate groups is the media itself and the fake news. They spoke out forcefully against hatred, bigotry, and violence, and strongly condemned the neo-Nazis, the white supremacists, and the KKK. It is finally time to rebuild our country, to take care of our people, and to fight for the jobs our great American workers deserve, and that's what we're doing.
Alicia Acuna is reporting live from Reno. Alicia, what's the reaction like today?
Hi, Melissa. Well, as you can imagine, it's quite extreme on both sides. This was a fiery campaign-style event in which the President of the United States spent a good half hour just letting the media have it, unloading about the negative coverage he received in response to his response to the violence and tragedy in Charlottesville. He recounted the statements he gave in the wake of deadly violence that erupted between white supremacists and counter-protesters, but did not mention comments that drew the most criticism from both Democrats and Republicans, that there were, quote, very fine people on both sides.
What happened in Charlottesville strikes at the core of America. And tonight, this stands united in forceful condemnation of the thugs who perpetrate hatred and violence. But the very dishonest media, those people right up there with all the cameras.
A lot of that. And without mentioning names, he went after Arizona GOP Senators John McCain and Jeff Flake, decrying the 1-no vote by McCain on repealing Obamacare and calling Flake weak on border security. But he did use his name in a tweet this morning saying, quote, not a fan of Jeff Flake, weak on crime and border. Trump may have given former Maricopa County Sheriff Joe Arpaio a huge sigh of relief, indicating there could be a pardon in his future for Arpaio's conviction for violating a judge's order on racial profiling. As for the thousands of protesters outside the venue, things didn't get chaotic until after the event let out. The Phoenix police chief says officers used tear gas and pepper balls to disperse the crowd after some threw rocks and bottles at police. Now today here in Reno, the president gives a speech before the American Legion. While here, he's expected to sign the Veterans Appeals Improvement and Modernization Act, which helps vets appeal VA benefit decisions. As for the possibility of protests, here's what the National Commander told us.
I don't know what's going to happen on the outside of this building, but inside in our convention, there will not be any protests. We respect the office of the President of the United States. Regardless of who's the President of the United States, America spoke last November.
Now, Melissa, outside of the convention center here in Reno, the police department says they are expecting at least 10 groups to protest the president's speech. Melissa?
Alicia Acuna, thank you.
Well, President Trump, as you've heard, was hitting the press hard again last night, accusing reporters of fabricating negative stories.
But the very dishonest media, those people right up there with all the cameras. So and I mean truly dishonest people in the media and the fake media, they make up stories. They have no sources in many cases. They say a source says there is no such thing, but they don't report the facts.
Well, let's bring in Jake Sherman, senior writer for Politico and co-author of Politico's Playbook. I suppose we in the media don't much like to hear the president say that, Jake, but he had a lot of support from those in the audience last night.
Yeah, it's actually fine with me because Trump's White House is, in many cases, one of the biggest leakers I've dealt with in Washington in many years. Yeah, the Trump's White House is overeager. There are many figures in his White House who are overeager to share information about the inner workings, about the president, and about how he conducts his job, which is actually really helpful as we do our job. And also, there are 535 members of Congress who are all very interested and eager to tell us how they do their job. So here's my question for the White House. It's how does dumping on the media get him any closer to a legislative achievement? How does dumping on Jeff Flake or Mitch McConnell or anybody in the Senate help him get his job done with a very slim 52-seat majority? How is he going to keep the government open, raise the debt ceiling, do tax reform while he's dumping on everybody in Washington that he needs? What we called it in Playbook this morning is it's a funhouse mirror strategy, a view of Washington. There's no one in Washington who thinks any of these tactics is going to get him any closer to a victory.
Yeah, he's got a very narrow Republican majority in the Senate, and piling on Mitch McConnell, John McCain, and Jeff Flake doesn't exactly encourage them to support his positions, does it?
No, it's inexplicable. I don't understand it. And I was getting text messages and emails this morning from a lot of Republicans on Capitol Hill who are just befuddled by this. And I had a text message. We're going to put this in the afternoon edition of Playbook. Remember when the White House said they were going to lean in on tax reform and get it done? The afternoon edition of Playbook. Remember when the White House said they were going to lean in on tax reform and get it done? Here we are in August, late August, and the president is talking about pardoning Joe Arpaio, which is within his right to do. He's spent 30 minutes talking about the media. How does that get him tax reform done? I don't know. I don't know. I don't understand. Maybe there's a 3 or 4D chess match that he's playing that we don't understand. But if he wants legislative achievements, this is not the playbook, so to speak, to get that done.
Yeah, it does seem that if tax reform is one of the White House's major goals, and they've said it is, alienating especially the Republicans, to say nothing of the Democrats, doesn't help.
No, John, and maybe we're missing something. Donald Trump did win the presidency. A lot of people didn't think he could, but I don't understand. Someone needs to show me the roadmap from railing on the quote unquote fake media to tax reform. I don't see how that gets him anywhere. And we're at, let's be clear here, we're at the end of August. There's only a couple months left in the year. They said they're going to do tax reform by October. There's 11 legislative days in September. I don't understand what the president is doing. I don't understand how that's going to get him to tax reform. And there's an election next year. The House and Senate are up for grabs. So members of Congress are going to have something to talk about. And I can tell you one thing they're not going to do. Their constituents in a lot of very swing districts and states do not care about their view on the media. They're not looking for a media critic. They're looking for legislators who can get things done.
We just have about 30 seconds left, but the president also suggesting he doesn't care if the government shuts down. He wants the wall built, and if he has to shut down the government to get the funding, he's ready to do that.
If government shutdowns, you won't find anybody on Capitol Hill who thinks it's good politically to shut down the government. Republicans have survived a government shutdown, so the politics are very complicated, but now they're not. There's Republicans in control of the House, Senate, and White House, so Republicans are going to get the blame if the government shuts down.
We will be looking for the afternoon edition of Politico's Playbook. Jake Sherman, the lead author. Jake, thank you.
Thanks.
So Venus Williams turning over her cell phone records after a fatal car accident. Plus, the 7th Fleet commander being relieved of duty by the Navy after 2 deadly collisions at sea. And Prince Harry calling out the people who stalked his mother, Princess Diana, even as she lay dying in Paris.
I think one of the hardest things to come to terms with is the fact that the people that chased her into the tunnel were the same people that were taking photographs of her while she was still dying on the back seat of the car.
So right now, some new information on some crime stories that we have been following. Lawyers for Venus Williams will turn over her cell phone records to attorneys for the family of a man who died in a car crash involving her in West Palm Beach, Florida. The family of the victim suing Williams for wrongful death. Her lawyers say the tennis star was not distracted. Surveillance footage shows Williams entering the intersection on a green light. Defense lawyers for a Texas woman accused of stabbing her husband to death say the Harris County Sheriff's Office jumped to conclusions. An attorney for Sandra Mulgar telling jurors that she is facing murder charges because, quote, a couple of cowboys came up with some theories about what happened. Her lawyer says a home invader hit her, tied her up, and killed her husband. And in Missouri, a mother has been charged with killing her 16-year-old daughter. Investigators finding Savannah Lecky's remains in southern Missouri after her mother, Rebecca Rudd, told police Savannah ran away. The teenager, who grew up in Minnesota, moved in with Rudd, who is her biological mother, last year.
President Trump outlining a new strategy in Afghanistan, which includes sending more troops over there. There is no public timeline for the deployment because the president says he does not want our enemies to know our plans. Mr. Trump also addressing Afghanistan at his Phoenix rally last night. Listen.
I laid out my vision for an honorable and enduring outcome in a very tough place, a place where our country has failed, Afghanistan. This is a place where terrorists are trained. What we're going to do with our incredible military, they're going to make unbelievable sacrifices, and they've already made, in some cases, the ultimate sacrifice. But we're fighting for them.
The Illinois Congressman Adam Kinzinger joins me now. He served in the Air Force in Afghanistan. He now serves on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Good morning to you, sir. You like what the president had to say regarding Afghanistan?
I do, and I think it's important to kind of lay the base here for a second. This isn't other wars we've been in. The Afghan people are actually very overwhelmingly supportive of an enduring U.S. presence and partnership with their country, unlike when the Soviets invaded and other invaders happened and the whole population rose up. They don't like the Taliban as much as we don't like the Taliban. These are the people that, again, would not allow girls to go to school, would basically behead people, and are brutal. What this does, and it's kind of the same strategy of what happened in Iraq during the surge, is not just the introduction of new troops. 20,000 additional troops in Iraq was actually very helpful, but what made the difference in Iraq was at a time when everybody was saying leave and pull out, President Bush came forward and said, not only aren't we leaving, we're going to stay and double down. And it actually took the wind out of the sails of al-Qaeda Iraq, and you had this Sunni awakening. That's what this is. This is President Trump very forcefully saying, we're not going to tell you when, where, we're not going to tell you how, but we're going to stay. We're going to work with the Afghan military, who's leaps and bounds better than they have been in the past, who are losing up to 100, 200 people a month defending their country. We're going to continue to enable them. The other thing I want to say real quickly is this. The American people have to understand this is going to be a war that goes on for a very long time, an even longer time, as well as the larger war on terror. I think it's a generational fight, probably, that's going to last as long as I live.
Well, obviously, the United States won World War II. We still have troops in Germany. We still have troops in Japan. We still have troops in Kosovo after that conflict.
Yeah, that's a great point, and that's what, look, when we get involved, there always needs to be a stabilizing presence. We saw what happens when we left. We won Iraq. I was part of the surge in 08 and 09. We had won that war. We leave in 2011, and you see the rise of ISIS. Now, we weren't engaged in heavy combat in 2010 and 2011. What we were engaged in was stiffening the spine of the Iraqi government, holding them accountable, and strengthening the military. It was when we left that we saw the military's spine removed, and actually they're back to fighting again hard. There's good lessons to learn here in Afghanistan, which is, it doesn't mean 100,000 troops engaging the Taliban in every mountain they exist, but it does mean stiffening the spine, building the networks of the Afghan military and government to begin to hold as much of their territory as they can and destroy this really demonic organization. This isn't some friendly organization we happen to pick a fight with. This is a demonic organization that huddled al-Qaeda pre-9/11 and would do the same today if they were in full control.
All right, so you're supportive of the president on these Afghanistan plans. I want to ask you about this controversy that he's involved in. According to the New York Times, the president and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell have not spoken in weeks after Mr. Trump criticized McConnell on Twitter and in a very heated phone call. The president does seem to be picking fights with members of the Republican leadership, and not even leadership, senators, even some members of Congress. Do you find that counterproductive, or is there some plan afoot here?
I think it's extremely counterproductive. The president had a great speech on Afghanistan, and then he turns back to fighting the very people he's going to need to back him on his strategy. The very people, the House of Representatives passed repeal and replace. The Senate got really close. They want to try again. They're going to need the people he's repeatedly attacking. I wish he'd go after, Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un as much as he is the Republicans. I think this is a time for our party to kind of lay off a lot of the emotion. Let's focus on our agenda and let's get it done. I think the president, I think he's done some really good things, especially when it comes to foreign policy. But to unify the party and ultimately unify the country is how we're going to get this big agenda done, which is not for us. It's not for our reelection. It's for the American people and for economic growth.
Yeah. You have to wonder what it's like for Elaine Chao at cabinet meetings when her husband, Mitch McConnell, is taking such heat from the guy who appointed her as Secretary of Transportation.
Yeah, it'd probably be slightly awkward, that's for sure. And again, I think this is a time, I understand there's a lot of emotion in what's going on. People are very angry. But continuing to rise anger on both sides of the aisle and frankly everywhere does not end in one side saying they're wrong. It ends in some really big bad things that we've seen in the past in this country before. We have to bring the temperature down a lot and have some grown-up discussions again.
Congressman Adam Kinzinger. Congressman, thanks very much for your thoughts today.
Anytime. Thanks.
A teenager missing in a national park, walking out of the woods after 11 days. Why one relative says his disappearance isn't that surprising. Plus, North Korea releasing new images of Kim Jong-un at a secret chemical plant, viewing what could be missile plans, and President Trump's call for tough new action. That's coming up.
You see what's going on in North Korea. All of a sudden, I don't know, who knows? But I can tell you what I said, that's not strong enough. Some people said it was too strong. It's not strong enough.
Right now, a multi-day search comes to a joyful end as a teenager missing for 11 days emerges from the Great Smoky Mountains in Tennessee. Austin Bohannon walked out in good condition and was taken to a hospital. The 18-year-old vanished following a hike with his stepfather. Exactly what happened after that, still not clear, but a relative says it's not unusual for Austin to go camping alone.
So just in this hour of happening now, North Korean state media releasing new images showing Kim Jong-un inspecting what may be new missiles. Let's bring in Jamil Jaffer. He is former senior advisor for the Senate Foreign Relations and House Intelligence Committee. Sir, thank you for joining us. What do you make of those drawings?
Well, thanks for having me, Melissa. Look, I mean, what we see here is at least two missiles. It looks like a submarine-launched medium-range missile, the Pukgoksong 3, at least from the title they say there. And then we see a potentially new long-range missile, three-stage missile, which is apparently labeled the Hwasong 14. Both concerning. Now, North Korea has a tendency to show things that aren't real or are still in development. So this could be in part, an effort to sort of push back a little bit. But it is concerning that they're building these long-range missiles that have more range and more capability to strike us here in the homeland.
Not only that, I mean, others have commented that what it looks like is they could be missiles that use solid fuel, which would mean that they could travel in canisters. They would be harder to detect and could be launched more quickly.
That's right. And also there's a casing that we see in one of the pictures that could be a much lighter casing, allowing them, again, the missiles to travel further. That's exactly right.
Do you think it's an attempt, though, to save face after what we've seen recently? And in fact, we're still doing demonstrations and practices, and they've sort of backed off a little bit their rhetoric.
Yeah, well, look, I think President Trump pushed back pretty aggressively against North Koreans. And I think it actually was pretty successful in the sense that all these Guam sort of threats have not materialized. And what you see here now is, well, look, we still have some capabilities. We're not going to do anything just yet, but know that we're still here. And so I think it is a way of them pushing back. But I do think it's also a way of them saving face in response to President Trump actually succeeding and preventing them from doing anything more aggressive.
It does remind you, though, that the problem is far from solved.